All right, we are all good. You are live.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the April 13th, 2023 regular meeting of the City of Annapolis Financial Advisory Commission. Here with us remotely this morning are commission members, Commission Vice Chair Bob Burden, Patrick Bannon, and Meehan, and me, Fred Sussman, Chair. Jim Cardillo will not be here, and I have not heard about Frank Brown or Perry Hepworth. So we'll get started, and if anybody else joins us, I'll pick up where we are in the agenda. I sent out an agenda, I think on Sunday. Any revisions or corrections to the agenda? Hearing none, entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented. A motion made by Bob Burden, seconded by Ed Meehan. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying your raising your right hand. Unanimous, approved. Move on to approval of the action minutes of March 9th, 2023. I sent them out as well on Sunday. Any revisions or corrections? Hearing none, entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the March 9th, 2023 meeting. Motion made by Bob Burden, seconded by Ed Meehan. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Go to reports. First, I'm going to go out of order. Jim Cardillo was kind enough to send us a very detailed audit committee report from the audit committee's March 23rd or thereabouts meeting. And I sent that out, I think yesterday. Hope you all had a chance to review it. If there are any questions, I can't answer them because I wasn't at the meeting. But Ross, were you in attendance of that meeting?
No, Ellie ran that meeting.
Oh, okay. Ellie, did you see any issues with Jim's report?
No. I was a little concerned because I didn't know what his consensus wasn't really until the end, but it was, favorable review. So yeah, no concerns. I think everyone got a copy.
All right. Anybody have any questions of Councilwoman Tierney about the audit committee report? No. Okay. Thank you. Next, Jody, just general on the finance department. If you have anything, we'll hold off budget issues until we get a little bit further in the agenda.
Sorry, I had to find my mouse cursor mark and get it to the right place. Just that we've been really busy with budget. Thanks to Katie and Capri, we have a budget analyst working with us now that help pull the whole thing together. That's the bulk of the work there. And it looks, the product was pretty good this year. I mean, it much better than in previous years, came together faster. So it shows we're gaining steam. And I have made an offer to a procurement officer candidate. But we're still doing some of the pre-employment check stuff. So I won't say names or background or anything, but so that position is going to be soon filled, hopefully. And then I've got just a couple more that have to be filled. But we're doing well.
Good. Any questions of Jody?
One question.
Yes, Bob.
Yeah, Jody, it seems that over the last several months during the reports, the challenge has been in finding candidates and extending offers and then getting people to accept those offers and so forth. Is this continuing to be a challenge for you?
Yes, a little. The challenge is competitive environment, lots of people looking, but also pay scale. And we have a pay scale that caps, it's got longevity steps. And when you get to those steps, you don't get any increases until you're there for a few years. It's tied to the union agreement. And it's difficult, I think, to convince people to come on when they're first opportunity for an actual merit increase could be years away. You can't get them mid-scale or upper scale. And you have to offer them that much to get them to come in. So it makes it more difficult. And I think Mike is going to speak to the study we're starting now to do, which should hopefully address that. So I'll let him say a few words.
In a minute. Let the record reflect that
Oh,
Thank you.
Yes.
I was gonna add to Jody, but I'll wait.
I'll let the record reflect that Frank Brown has joined us at 8:08. So sorry for that interruption.
that's all right.
Mike,
I thought you were calling me out for not letting you, the chair, actually select who speaks. So I was a little embarrassed. So.
No. Okay, Mike, Jody, do you have anything else?
Not about that. It's just, I think that's one of our barriers. I think others didn't come for other reasons because of the competitive environment and other jobs offering to work from home primarily, and we don't offer that. And so, we have some work from home policies, but they're not that robust. So we've just, and we're a small organization, and I think some people are looking for a step up to a larger, more challenging organization. So you just got to find the right candidate. And I think we have this time. So.
Mhm.
Right.
Well, I would assume that Mike in his report, well, the other question I had, was this a problem across some of the other departments within the city where
Mhm.
they have vacancies and they're
Yeah.
trying to.
Planning and zoning is a tough one, and police as well. Police is an ongoing issue, but that's probably for other reasons. I think we fixed the police pay scale, at least in my perspective. We made a big leap this year with our pay scale adjustment, but it's still a recruiting issue for them.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Jody. Bob, thanks for those questions. Mike, sorry
Yes,
for interrupting you before.
no problem. As Jody anticipated, I want to add on to what she was saying. The council on Monday night approved a supplemental appropriation for a class and compensation study that we hope will start to address a lot of the issues beyond public safety, because I think that was addressed pretty aggressively in the last negotiations. And that'll look at the pay scales and reclassifications, issues that we're dealing with internally, as well as recruiting people. But it also deal with the issue that you all brought up about looking at the defined contribution plans for retirement as well. So we're looking forward to kicking that off. I don't want to go into great detail, but I do want to point out that we've been responsive internally to some of the questions that you've asked. And I commend Jody and Tricia for kind of stepping forward and pushing this to start this fiscal year so that it can have an impact during the upcoming fiscal year. So yeah, Bob, we've had some issues with attracting and retaining and the like, and I think we're heading in the right direction. We'll see. Now, in terms of the office, I'm pleased to say starting today, the new assistant city manager, Victoria Buckland. Really excited for this person. Just to give you a background, since 2007, she's been working with Montgomery County in a variety of positions. Most recently, since 2016, as the Chief Operating Officer for the Department of Health and Human Services. And to give you a perspective, they had a $340 million budget in that department alone, which is twice the size of ours. So she also comes in with a skill set that I know makes Ross particularly happy, because she started in the county executive's office in 2007 to 2010, being a management and budget specialist in the county stat office. And essentially what that is the performance measurements that she stood up and ran and operated. So among other general assignments that she'll be working on, that will be one specifically. And she starts today. And as I've told others and Ellie too now, my inner nerd really likes the fact that for 10 years, she was working for Goddard Space Flight Center in the robotics program. She's an electrical engineer too, so she brings that talent. We were at our staff meeting yesterday at the rec center, try to move it around. And Roz was talking about Maryland Hall and different entities that she's working with and at Stanton Center. And I threw Victoria out there as maybe she can help with the robotics program beyond just what she's doing in this office. So I'm really excited. I think it'll help the overall operations of the city, and the council will see the benefits of it, and certainly the city. That's my report.
Good, Mike. Thanks. Appreciate it. Questions of Mike on his report? Okay, let's move on. Unfinished business. I don't have anything specific on the fact of spending affordability subcommittee. I know there have been some internal discussions about how to move that forward. I haven't received any feedback on that, so I don't have anything to report. Mike, Jody, Bob, anybody have anything to report? If not, we'll hold it off till next month.
No, just waiting on the discussions that Mike and Jody, I would assume, are in the process of having as to, next steps, and where they see or what direction they would like to see this go. So,
Right. We've only had a few. Honestly, we've been in the midst of the budget, and that's been, I think, Jody's primary focus. So we haven't had a lot of discussions, but I would like to say on another related topic, the Fells Institute, we'd like to follow up on that. If you can get some additional information to us on it. We had talked about that when it first came up, and again, we're going through the budget, but sometime next year, and with the additional staff person in my office, maybe we can dive into something like that as well.
okay.
Thanks for that, Mike. We'll connect back with you on that. Okay, any, yes, Ellie?
Yeah, just for the minutes, I was a little confused there. Did you want me to report on the external auditor report, or did you want me to report on Jim's report on the auditing report?
Since he was going to report of what happened to the last meeting.
Okay,
Well,
sorry
I
about
wanna
that.
make sure.
I was reporting on Jim's report of the audit report. So yes, at the audit committee meeting, we did have a report by our external auditor. It was their first one. And I know that Jody's pretty humble about this, but it was excellent. And there was one minor thing that's been resolved. So all in all, it was a very refreshing meeting hearing this auditor for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you. I remember, seeing that and being very impressed and pleased at the report and the work the staff did. Ross, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, very quickly. I wanted to summarize several great things that I think are happening in the city right now, which Fred, you and Bob, as long-term members, I think will really appreciate. Spending affordability, I hope we move forward on that. But the strategic plan, we're going to be meeting the end of this month with we being the council with the senior managers. From that, I hope we're going to also get a contract to greatly improve our performance measures. We're moving forward on our comprehensive plan. And so I think there's a number of really good management things. The class and comp study, we're really going to do it right this time. We're giving it the right amount of money. And I think that it will address a lot of issues that Jody was mentioning about, not just in finance, but across the city, hiring the right people at the right level. So I think it's a time to be very excited about all of the different management things. And maybe that's because we have a new city manager who actually was a city manager. But in any event, I really think there's a lot of reason to be excited about where we're moving over the next year or so.
That's good. Yeah, Ross, thanks for that perspective. Bob?
Yeah, just Mike, I was wondering how, and if you have any information yet as to how the city fared in the General Assembly session that just concluded?
Not a lot. In fact, Gavin and Kate we were talking about it, and they don't even quite know. I mean, we didn't have a point person other than our elected legislative people to work the General Assembly this year. So I don't have a complete picture of it yet. For example, we've been getting inquiries about the new, I guess, legalized cannabis sales and how that'll impact the city. And we're going to reach out to MML to try to get a little bit of information. But our focus primarily through the mayor's office has been aggressive funding for some of the larger capital projects. And I think as recently as yesterday, because the mayor presented at the director's staff meeting, he's waiting to see the full impact of that, Bob. And so I wish I had more details, but I really don't.
Okay, thank you.
The cannabis one's interesting. I suggested to the city attorney to reach out to MML because there is a discussion on the local end about having some direct funding to the locals, and Mako took the lead on it. And I don't think we got much of anything beyond just the property tax component of it.
Mhm.
Okay. Yes, Ellie.
Yes, to be more specific, I think the concern is whether or not the fee in lieu of is intact. Are we getting the same as we did?
I understand that it's intact. I don't understand that it increased any.
Thank you. Well, that's good.
Jody.
Jody.
So Alderman Arnett was correct in that years ago when they set that baseline, they passed legislation that set a baseline. We were to get the CPI on top of the baseline every year. We've had 2 years where we did get the increased amount. This year's it hasn't come yet. I don't know if they're waiting for an invoice from us or not. Sometimes they sit on it until we actually start pestering them for this year's amount was 700. I don't know, 760. Can't remember off the top of my head. What I think this next year we're up in the upper 700s. I don't know if Katie has that information at hand. I was just trying to pull that up to see what the pilot amount from the state is. We're assuming we're getting it. The former governor a couple of times that had been passed and did not honor they got it out of the legislation at one point in time. Then they passed it and then they had an emergency declaration which allowed them to pull it back. So it took a couple of years for it to take effect, but so far it has. We've been getting it in the upper 700,000s now, and I think we're close to 800 at this point. So it is set by previous legislation. I hope they didn't take it away. I hope that's not what you're referring to, that we could lose it, but.
Yeah, Mike, is there some thought in going forward for next year and onward to get a point person to lobby on behalf of the city?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, candidly, sometimes how that person is chosen isn't quite as comprehensive as it should be. I'm being political about it or a politic about it. I've certainly seen the value of just somebody who's, blanketly knows the General Assembly, and I don't think that would hurt us at all. We talked about it a little bit this year, but it kind of got away. And I think it's a good idea, Bob. I've seen it work if you get the right person. I know the mayor really prides himself and does a very aggressive job in reaching out, particularly to the executive branch. But again, he himself said he's just not sure. So I think it would help us.
Okay.
Okay, Patrick. You're muted, Patrick.
Here we go. I just wanted to add, I think that's a good idea because I thought some of these projects you were doing, I know I spent a lot of my last few years at HUD, and if you could, some of those, there's CPD grants, and gives you a lot of leeway what you can use those for. So if you have somebody working with in the state to funnel some of that money to the city. It would be helpful, I think,
Thank you, Patrick.
and probably other federal agencies as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other questions of Mike on his report and this general discussion? Hearing none, thank you all very much for that. And now we will move down to new business FY24 budget. So just a preliminary remark or two. You all received within the past day or so the budget materials, the budget ordinance, the budget, the tax rate materials, the fine and fees, fines, fees, schedule, et cetera, et cetera. These were just introduced to the council on Monday. So it's not as if there's been a great delay in getting them to us, but nevertheless, we did receive a short time before this meeting. And I don't know, if commission members have had an opportunity to review them all. I would not be just surprised if you did not. I skimmed them very quickly just to see what was in there, but did not do any type of detailed analysis. I think one of the things that commission members want to look at, and for that matter, senior staff as well, is the facts report from last year, which I attached to the meeting materials. And it might not be bad if, not that you don't have anything else to do, but the fact made a number of recommendations and made a number of observations about the state of the city's finances as of last year. And it might be helpful if we're able to get some comments back from you all saying, oh, this isn't an issue anymore. This isn't an issue. We're on the way on this, we're on the way on that. Just as Ross talked about these different management tools. I know some of those were addressed in last year's fact report and in prior. So what I don't want to do is regurgitate last year's report just because we don't, have better information. So to the extent you all can take a few minutes and just kind of skim through and give us some feedback as to what has or has not been addressed or what is still an issue for that matter. That would be very, very helpful, at least to me and hopefully to the entire group. What is our timeline here? I know the finance committee has to make a report to the city council by mid-May sometime. But we are, as I understand, we are not so constrained. I don't think there's any specific deadline by which FAC has to make its report to the council. At least I don't remember seeing that. But that having been said, I think we ought to talk about and think about, where we go from here. I know last year, we had presentations from, at least according to the report, from Jody and Mike on the budget, also debt affordability from Davenport and some other stuff. I don't know what the intent is in terms of providing us with report on the budget, summary of the budget, building to finance, the capital project through debt, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what I know, Jody, you were a little hesitant about presenting a full presentation today because you want to wait until you give it to the council later today. But at least it will be whatever you can provide to us today will be a start. And I think you're presenting the council with a PowerPoint presentation later today. Is that right?
Yeah, so I put together a PowerPoint for the council. I only tweaked it a little bit for FAC. I think it's a little long for FAC. That's why I was trying to hope to edit some of it out, but I didn't have time to really edit it down very, very much. So we'll just kind of quickly go by the slides as if I don't think that's something of interest, for instance, details on the CIP projects and what they're doing for the city, those types of things.
Jody, can you provide us at some point with the PowerPoint?
Can I provide a what?
At some point, can you provide us with the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I will this afternoon after the meeting. I just,
Okay.
and all of the information that I put on the PowerPoint is actually in those budget books, which everybody's had access to now. So I'm not as concerned. I was thinking about it earlier, as you said, and wondering about doing it first to the fact, but it's all out there anyways, and the council's had their books since Monday. So I'm not that concerned about it. So I just, it is more than you probably will be interested in, and we'll try to speed through it and not take a lot of time today. There's still some things that I want to do for fact before you make your decisions. I think there is a date that you have to have your report by, and I think that may be why Alderwoman Tierney has her hand up.
What was that last thing you said?
You
I
have a
heard you
report, you
say-
have a deadline as to when you have to make your report recommendations, and I think it's early May. So Ellie may have that calendar in front of her because I don't have the calendar up right now.
Hello.
Okay, well, you're muted. I know you're not muted, Ellie. Go ahead. I see you have your hand up, Ellie.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, and we discussed this at your last meeting, that you got a copy of it's actually a resolution. It's basically the same timeline that we've been doing for several years. It's resolution 59-22, and it's the timeline for the budget review. For example, today is the city council work session, and then next week we start 2 weeks of department reviews.
Right, do you have that in front of you?
I do have that.
What does it say about the fact?
The fact, your review is hold on.
I think it's the first council meeting night, which is May 8th.
Yeah,
That's when it's due.
May 8th, yes. May 8th is your review due to the city council.
And I remember last year you had at least one interim meeting in April.
Yes.
We also invite you all to attend or watch the department presentations. Most of them should be broadcast, so you can see those. You can watch the work session. We are having Davenport come for debt affordability during one of those presentations in April. And I don't know if you want them to come to you separately. If you want them to come to you separately, we'll have to get that set up with them. So
Okay.
That's an important meeting, and we have it as a joint meeting with BAC. That's April 27th. I just sent this to Kim to send to you to distribute. On April 27th, it's a council work session for the capital budget, debt affordability, as Jody said, and it will be a joint meeting with the FAC.
What time is that?
April 27th. Those are usually start at 3 p.m.
Is that going to be a virtual meeting or is that going to be?
Oh, no, that's physical. I mean,
So I have 2 on my calendar, so let's check on the start time, because I have 2 o'clock, but I don't know if that's just something.
oh,
that
I'm
was in
sorry.
there or
I'm
some- I
typically-
had an invite. This is an invite from Regina, so I think it might be a 2 o'clock start.
Is this?
You said that's April 27th.
Yes.
25th.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong month. I'm sorry. That's me. Sorry, she's right. 27th is the Thursday. No, it's 3 to 5. Sorry, I totally misspoke.
Will it also be virtual or just only live?
Both.
Only in person? Both?
Similar to a city council meeting.
You can watch, you cannot participate virtually, correct, Ellie?
Correct.
I mean, you could watch it, but we don't have a setup where you can call in and ask questions. At least that's my understanding.
Work sessions, there's no public testimony.
Okay, we're talking about the joint meeting with finance and fact on the debt affordability for the 27th at 3
Yeah.
o'clock. That will be a physical meeting at the city council chambers, correct?
Yes, if you want to interact, you'll have to be at the chambers.
Okay, very good.
Okay. So Jody, you mentioned that last year we held 1 or 2 special meetings, interim meetings, and you're absolutely right. And that's something that we need to talk about today, when we're going to, hold 1 or 2 special meetings this month, but this year. But let's hold that until after you make your presentation, and then we can talk about special meeting dates.
Okay,
Okay?
are you ready?
Yeah.
Mike, I don't know, do you want to say anything up front before I get started with my presentation on general budget process or?
Just very general. I commend Jody and her staff for how they've managed this process. I can tell you from experience, it isn't always so smooth. We've tried to remain pretty conservative in this budget, particularly looking beyond the horizon to next year when we have negotiations again, and trying to make sure that we are consistently able to fund future needs. Beyond that, a couple of things that we focused in on is one is planning and zoning, to add an additional planner and office associate. Often an issue that comes up is the inability or the slow process in planning and zoning. Clearly, we're down a director again right now, and we're initiating the hiring or the interview process for that. That was one thing that we really wanted to focus in on. We've moved this is, I think, more directed to the council, but I want to make sure you pay attention that we've acknowledged the internship program as something the city has done in the past. But we want to manage it internally a little bit more because it was paying interns more money than our employees and was a little bit freeform. And so it's going to be in HR, and Will Rao will be managing it from the mayor's office. And then there are a lot of other details, but the thing that I'm most interested in is just getting this class compensation study done and enacted during the year so that we can handle a lot of the issues that we've been experiencing with retention and competitiveness. And that's really it. I again commend Jody and her staff for managing this well. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start by asking Madeline I sent her the PowerPoint earlier if she could. And all right, I hope everybody can see that. I'm gonna have to move the pictures over. So let me see, I've done something, so there we go. I got to see if people are raising their hands or something. So I'm trying to set my screen so I can see at least some of the faces. All right. Give me a second. Technologically challenged. There we go. All right, so this is a few slides we put together just to give you an overview of our 2024 budget that we submitted to the council on Monday. Next slide, please. All right, so as I think the chairman spoke a few minutes ago, what we had, there is different components of the budget. The actual legal budget is the ordinance and the resolutions that we put before council. The budget ordinance has all the totals and support in the appendices to detail how much spending authority we're giving each department and each fund. And that's the crux of the budget. The fees and fines resolution come through every year to set our fee levels is something that's required by the code. Those are introduced each year with a table that has all of the city fees and fines. We also have another piece of legislation called, it's a resolution for the pay plan, which establishes pay scales, adds any new position titles that need to go in, and a few other provisions regarding the workforce. And then, of course, we all tend to use the operating book. That is the larger book, about 100 pages or so. That talks about the detailed budget, what's in the budget, some of the more detailed components with a section for each department. And some useful tables up front that summarize the budget in various ways, so you can get a snapshot view of what's happening financially for us next year. And then we have the capital project book that includes the spending authority currently for the capital budget, and then the CIP, which is the out years that it shows, which shows our capital plan for the following 5 years. And it has a page for each project if you're interested in any project in particular. Next slide.
Jody, before you go,
Mhm.
I noticed when I was skimming through that there's an error in one of the pieces of legislation. It is supposedly a resolution, but it has an ordinance number. Says ordinance so-and-so, and then it says a resolution to. All the others appear correct, but you may just want to take a look at that. I can't access it right now.
Okay. One of the fees or fines or the pay plan, it may have been an ordinance, but you're saying the language says it's a resolution.
Yes, it
We'll
says-
check on that. We'll let the Office of Law know, the city clerk's office, the ones that are putting that together. So,
Yeah.
It's the pay plan. It's-
okay,
It should be a resolution.
all right. All right, so we'll reach out to Cynthia. I'll have Katie reach out to Cynthia and let her know that that's gotta be fixed.
Thank you, Rose.
Say, Jody,
Thank you for letting us know, because that's important. Okay,
yeah, Jody, before you leave this page, we have received the operating book and the capital book already via email the other day. Is that correct?
yes, you also got
And
the
we do have,
legislation. You also got the legislation. There were like 7 documents or something on that legislation. The two,
Okay.
the 3 resolutions and the budget ordinance. Hopefully you got them. If you didn't, let us know. We'll be glad to resend them.
no, I have them. I saw them come in, I think yesterday or the day before, one of the two.
Yeah.
And actually, I think the legislation was all in one PDF, if I'm correct.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
And
Thank
the
you.
budget ordinance might have been in one PDF, and it has the main body of the ordinance and several appendices. So that's a long one. And I think that is in one PDF.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Next slide. All right, so here's some other support that we're working on. I haven't had time to pull this together, but I hope to do it in the next couple days. I know that some of this is information that the FAC has asked for, and we're trying to pull it together this year. The 5-year projections, we did that last year, and we started it. We have it drafted. We have to adjust the numbers and to look at some of the projections out into the out years and get that to you. It shows the fact that it'll show you that gap between the expenses and revenues that will occur if our projections for ARPA use are pan out to actually to where we have to actually use ARPA funds, which we haven't had to do yet. We're going to give everybody a capital reserve tracker. That's our capital reserve funds that we use for capital projects. We're assigning some to capital projects next year, and this tells you what's left in the reserve. And our one-time reserve tracker is, we have funds we set aside for one-time use. That's also a running spreadsheet of what we have in the reserve and what we're using it for. This is something that the FAC has asked for, capital improvements that have impact on future operating costs. That takes a little time because most of our projects are repair and maintenance, and it's hard to quantify if the repair and maintenance is going to provide any extra cost. Typically, a repair and maintenance will actually save you cost because the maintenance costs are high on something, and so we repair it and it's actually lower. And when you're building a new facility like we are, the maintenance facility, that's one that would lend itself to this analysis. We are currently leasing space elsewhere, and with a new building and new systems, we actually might end up saving operating funds. So it's kind of a difficult analysis to do, not being in the space and not knowing what it's going to cost. We can try to compare it to what we're paying now for the current space. We don't have a lot of projects that build brand new facilities. I'm going to provide some updates to position summaries. While we were going through the final reviews of the budget book, I found a couple of departments that I thought that the position summaries weren't updated correctly. So we'll provide the council correction pages as we go. We have an FTE presentation that we do every year with positions, and I haven't had a chance to update that yet. The harbor master is now under the control of the city manager, and they have a lot of temporary FTEs, and we didn't do the analysis to see how many we have to show under the city manager's office. City dock funding, that's one thing I thought we might want to track. The funding sources on that project have switched and changed a little bit in the last year because of the sale of the Medco debt and sub debt, and then we did a refunding of the sub debt, and and we got some new grants. So I thought we might want to provide a funding update just to show how things have changed. The OpenGov is our software where the budget information resides. The council is experienced in this from the last year or two. You can go into OpenGov link and click on the information you want. You can see our budget down to the line item, to the account level. So we can provide fact that if that's something you wish. I don't know if that you want to get into that much detail, but some of the council members do enjoy looking at that detail. Next slide. First, we wanted to take a look at 23. I think the FAC has heard some of this from us in the last couple meetings. Our general fund revenue projection is good. It's about $98.3 million, and that's 1.9 million over what we had budgeted. Our expenditures are well under budget. We had 100. We had 105 in the budget for this year, and we think we're spending in the about 100.3 range. Those estimates are early. We try to make them generous. We don't want to underestimate what departments are going to spend and then end up over funding the reserves for the upcoming budget process. So we tend to be generous in allowing them to spend their non-salary line items, and then we do a real careful projection about where we think they're coming out on the salary and benefits line. And that's going to be about 5.1 million under budget, which then gives us 7 million to the positive from where we budgeted. On the revenue side, building permits were strong, about $822,000. We got $2.1 million of interest income. And if you know, during the pandemic, interest income pretty much bottomed out to almost nothing. And that's climbing because the interest rates, the inflation is driving the feds to increase the interest rates, as you know. And that's benefiting us because most of our investments are in a fund that adjusts its interest on a regular basis. And so it's really picked up. And that coupled with the increases, general increases, smaller increases in our total reserves and our total cash balances adds to that. So it's increased substantially. And we've seen an increase of $2.1 million in income taxes from 22 to 23. The savings I've got here, we've seen the savings, as I said, in finance. Finance department had a lot of turnover as we talked about. The procurement officer position has been vacant for almost a year, actually over a year. So that's a substantial portion of that number. And I've had, as you know, at least five other vacancies during most of the year in one form or another. Police are underspending due to vacancies. They still have about, as I understand, 12 to 14 vacancies that they're trying to fill. But we also got an extra $500,000 in a grant from the state that we didn't anticipate. We usually get around $1 million, and they gave us $1.5 million. And that's a grant that we use, we can use for general police salaries. So we moved some of their salaries over to that grant, and that relieves the pressure on the general fund.
Hey, Jody. Yeah, Jody. Taking a look at this slide here on your 23 closeout.
Mhm.
General fund revenue projection is 98 million and some change.
Mhm.
General fund expenditure projection is 100 million and some change.
Mhm.
So that alone indicates that we spent about 2 million more than we took in. Is that correct?
Yes, but keep in mind that within that 100 million is close to $5 million of expenditures from the reserves, meaning our capital project transfer from the capital reserves is what we consider a one-time expense. And that is within that 100. And the use of the one-time reserve is also within there. And if I'm not mistaken, the two of them together totaled around $5 million for our FY23 budget. And those expenses are within the 100. So on an operating basis, on an ongoing basis, the revenues are above the expenditures.
Okay, so we are accessing reserves though, correct?
We do, and we plan it that way because as we build up those reserves, we set them aside for certain purposes. It's like saving up for a particular thing and then spending for it. The capital reserve is accumulated to fund our capital projects, and every year it takes a piece of our fund balance. If we have fund balance that's in excess of our required reserve, we give it to these other reserves. And but we make sure that we only allocate it for things that are a one-time issue, meaning we don't have to continue that funding the following year if the money's not there.
Now, I have the presentation you gave us last year up on my screen. And back at the presentation last year, you had a general fund revenue projection for 23 of 95.4, and you had general fund appropriations of 100,434. So certainly, doing 98.3 versus 95.4 is, very nice to see. The general fund appropriations, you seem to be pretty much on target there. Last year, you projected for 23, 100, 434, 250. And you actually, what you're projecting now to close out the year is 100, 345, 550. Okay, so rather than having a $5 million, I don't want to say deficit, but appropriations exceed revenues for 5 million. It looks like you got that down to about 2 million. Is that correct?
So you said 104 versus 100, right?
You said last year you said 104, and what you're saying now is you're going to come in at 103. 103.
345. So
That's
that's about 4 million. But keep in mind that during the year, we've had budget adjustments where we increase the spending for various purposes. Usually for the general fund, it's for larger one-time things. Capital, I know we had some capital project additional expenditures. So that that number you're looking at, the 104. If you look at our adjusted budget for 23, I don't know if Katie, I have it open here. I don't know if I have it to the right page. Our adjusted budget, and this is in your budget book. Our adjusted budget for the general fund as of right now is 105,429,000. So that is the $5.1 million that you see there. We used some capital reserve monies during the year to fund some extra. Go ahead, Katie.
I just want to ask a point of clarification. Bob, when you're saying you're looking at the PowerPoint from last year, Are you looking at the outlook for FY22 closeout?
No, this is general fund FY 2023 budget totals from last year that I'm looking at, page 16 of the
Okay, so
PowerPoint you gave us last.
Proposed 23.
That's correct. And I'm just
Okay.
trying to match up what you proposed versus where you think you're going to end up.
Mhm.
And as I said, it looks like you're going to end up a lot better on general fund revenue. And you're pretty close on the mark as to what you thought your general fund appropriations would be between what you projected last year, which was 100,434,250, and now you're saying 100,345,550. So you're within $100,000.
So Bob, the spending budget for last year started the year at 103,111,350. The subsequent budget adjustments adjusted the budget upward where we were anticipating to spend 105,429. That's 105,429,000. We're spending $100,345,000, which is a savings of $5.1 million. Which is, I won't call it a savings. I'll say we're spending less than we projected by 5.1 million.
Okay, again, we just got the budget book here. But all I'm doing here, and I'm not trying to make an issue of anything, all I'm trying to do is match up what you all thought we were going to do last year for 23 and where you think you all are going to end up.
So
Based on the PowerPoint presentation you gave us last year at this time, versus where you think we're going to end up. That's all I'm trying to observe here. Now, we just got the budget book yesterday or the day before, so we haven't had a chance to go through and look at that detail.
all right, so I think
But
about
if nothing else, I'm just more or less raising a compliment that it seems like from what you told us last year to what you're telling us now, that the city did better on revenues and you came pretty much in where you thought your expenditures would be based on the PowerPoint that you gave us
okay, so
last year.
in the PowerPoint, if you're looking at a projection of spending, it's probably a projection of the spending for 22, because we would have been at the same point in time last fiscal year. We would have been coming up to the end of fiscal 22. And in that PowerPoint, I would have been projecting fiscal year 22 expenses, which is what Katie was just saying.
That's not what it says on what I'm looking at from last year. It says general fund FY 2023 budget totals
So that's what we intend to spend in the budget.
in 2023.
Three. Okay.
Okay, and that's what I'm looking at right now,
Right, and that's
Jody.
100
And then based on what you're showing us this morning, all I'm saying is that you guys the city did much better in revenue projections, and it seems like your general fund expenditure projection came in on the mark. That's the only thing I'm observing.
All right.
You know, I don't know why we're getting, why this is turning into something.
We got a lot of.
So Bob, why don't we talk offline about this and see what you're looking at, and I'll clarify what I think we're not communicating correctly here. Because we've spent 5 million less than our current 23 budget amount. So I think that there might be some confusion on what you're seeing there.
Well, again,
Maybe there was a typo.
no, there's no typo. I mean, I'm looking at the projections you gave us last year. Obviously, these projections were made prior to striking the budget, and there may have been adjustments after that. After you gave us the presentation last year, which is probably what you're looking at. But anyhow, actually, I was trying to pay you a compliment. But it seems like, you're getting very defensive over something that, I wasn't even trying to take issue with. I was just trying to, point out that, the city from what you projected to us last year, and where you think you're going to come out, you guys were pretty much on the mark. But nonetheless, let's leave it as it is and move on.
Okay. So we've covered this slide. Let's move on. This slide talks a little bit about the good news. We have revenue that's coming in excess of we had budgeted, and so therefore, and that with the underspending on the expense side, we will not have to use ARPA funding in 23. If you remember last year, the budget included what I believe is $3 million that we anticipated we'd have to use ARPA funding for. We will not have to use that money for the general fund expenses. We have state income taxes that are strong. Property taxes came in $1.6 million extra from the previous year. Interest revenue, again, I covered that earlier. It's very strong this year. It's a multiple of what we were getting in 21. And like I said, the property taxes are stable, and our general fund balance is strong. We've set aside our required 15% reserve, and fiscal 23 results are expected to add to our reserves. Next slide. We do have our challenges ahead. Again, in using ARPA to pay for our general fund expenditures, it's showing that our revenue growth, when you do it on a pure projection basis, lags a little bit behind our operating costs. This causes what we call a structural deficit when we use a source like ARPA that is meant to cover operating costs. That when those funds run out and dry up, we will have to fill that with some other source of revenue. However, those deficits that we projected in the past couple of years where we need to use the ARPA haven't materialized because of our underspending and our success in our revenue collection. So I'm not sure where we're going to end up next year. I can just, based on projections, that we've programmed $2.8 million of ARPA to go into the budget next year. We do get our properties reassessed this year on the triennial property reassessment. So we will have a better idea in the fall of what extra funding that will bring. And we are going to have to focus some more on our other fees, fines, and our occupancy taxes in order to fill that gap on the operating budget. We're going to have to, I've got a plan to have all the departments look very carefully at our fees. Some fees have been adjusted in the last couple of years, but there are others that haven't been adjusted in quite a while. So we need to look there. Fees are supposed to represent the cost of the city's staff performing a service, and our costs go up every year. So eventually, you don't want to increase fees every year, but you would definitely want to reassess them every few years and see if they need to be adjusted upward. And we may have some opportunity there. We want to ensure assessment and collection of fines. That's something that adequate staffing is needed for in order to do that. For instance, on the inspection side, trying to make sure that we're assessing fines when people are violating rules. I still think that we're missing people on the occupancy taxes that either are not aware or are trying to avoid the collection of the taxes and sending them to the city. So I would like to be able to dedicate some staff in that regard. Next slide.
Jody, just going back for a sec, in the whole budget planning process, or to what extent have you given thought or plan to try to avoid a structural deficit?
So the so I kind of talked about it in that last bullet. I do want to, there are some opportunities on the revenue side. We just are going to have to fortify our staff, dedicate people to collection efforts. On the occupancy tax side, that's something that I want to do with a member of my staff, get somebody in there that's in charge of accounts receivable collection, because that can make a big difference in the numbers overall, to make sure that everybody who has a rental is collecting the 7% tax and remitting it to us. When we hired host compliance a couple years ago, we definitely saw a jump in our enforcement and our collections as a result. But there's people who rent just during Navy graduation and the boat show are not required to get a regular permit. They get a 0 fee permit, but they still are expected to collect occupancy taxes and remit them. And I think we're missing a lot there with people that aren't aware that they have to do this, or just intentionally not collecting it and sending it. So that's an opportunity. I would want to work with the Office of Law on, we have a lot of fines that we assess, and I don't know what the collection success is on those fines. I know they've been trying to work on that in the last couple of years since Mike Lyles has come on board. We've had a lot of uncollected fines. And on the other fronts, I think that generally the revenue, I'm hoping to see the revenue for income taxes be better than I have projected. I've been very conservative there. We got a bad surprise on income taxes a few years ago, where we had tried to budget in line with the previous year, but then some change in somebody's the capital gains for that year were really high. And the next year we just tanked. We lost, like, the revenue source went down by like 1.8 million, if I remember correctly. So I try very hard not to over project on state income taxes. But our 11 million this year, there's thoughts by both the state and the county that our income taxes will go up anywhere from 2 to 3.5%. Oh, that's something that's very difficult to project. And if, while we're going through this process in the fall and looking at revenues, that's the information we have to gather when we go into the union negotiations, so that we know what we can afford to provide in the way of compensation packages. So that would be the next area to look at, is the compensation, what's available for compensation. And
Hey,
then,
Jody.
yeah.
Yeah, Jody, this is Bob. And the first part of your answer to Fred's question, the items that you noted seem to be cash flow items when you're talking about collections of fines and so forth and so on. I mean, the latter part of your comments, when you're talking about, property, or talking about income taxes and so forth, certainly I can understand. But cash flow, these cash flow items, I don't think so much. Yes, they would require it. If they're not collected, you'd see a cash flow deficit. But I think when we're talking about structural deficit, if I understand correctly, we're talking about a built-in deficit, regardless of, how cash flow is occurring. Certainly, a reduced cash flow will, exacerbate the situation more so than it would be. But more specifically, with the structural deficit, if we eliminate the cash flow, issues that you're trying to address, which are important, the structural deficit nonetheless is still going to be there.
Okay.
And you did mention, the city's, percentage of the income taxes, and you did note the previous slide about the hope and anticipation that property assessments will go up and stuff like that. But there are potentially other areas outside of cash flow that, beyond those that you've already noted, that could, reduce the structural deficit?
Yes, so the structural deficit tells us that when we can get by with our ARPA funds for next year or so. When those ARPA funds are no longer there, there's got to be other efforts to either increase revenue flow, which is what I was talking about with the collection efforts. If we increase those cash flow efforts, we get more revenue. That helps to eliminate that structural deficit. If we decrease expenses, or our expenses do not climb as high as they have been, that's something we address through compensation packages. So those two efforts, increasing the flow of revenue and decreasing expenses, or decreasing the rate at which expenses climb, let me put it that way, will help eliminate that structural deficit. It's not built in permanently. We have to identify other regular sources of revenue and curb expense increases. So those are the two things that I was talking about.
Okay. How much longer are the ARPA funds available to the city?
If I'm not mistaken, I think they go to December of you have to commit the funds to something by December of 25. You do not have to spend it. You just have to commit it to its purpose, meaning you'd have to issue a purchase order or something.
Okay.
We may end up with this next year, this time, if there's still funding left, we may have to decide not to use it in the operating budget, but to use it for other purposes. Because it seems as though our expenses are always coming in less than we budget and saving us from having to tap into that ARPA balance.
Okay, and there's no possibility the federal government trying to pull any of that back with some of the budget issues they're dealing with?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything of that sort yet.
Okay, very good.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
The major point is, if that happens, we have to make it work. We're not going to spend beyond what we have coming in, what we have set aside. We're not going to do it. So we'd have to find ways to either increase our revenue flow or reduce our expenses or reduce the rate at which the expenses are climbing. So there's just no way we're going to establish a budget that doesn't work.
Well, that kind of begs the question as to whether we shouldn't at least be talking about what type of, well, we're already talking about the challenges. The question is, what are the potential solutions, and should that discussion be on the table, both for the city and in the fact, in our advisory role, should we be looking ahead and potentially anticipating what some of the solutions may be, rather than waiting until it's right on top of us. Obviously, we could be talking about additional fee or tax increases and stuff like that, or expense reductions, or, as was told by a mentor of mine many, many years ago, if you increase your revenues by 5% and reduce your expenses by 5%, you got a 10% delta, to your advantage. So, these are just some of the discussions that I've always advocated that probably should be on the table, even though you may not have to implement. Nonetheless, you should have a plan in place.
Right, and some of the options that are out there I spoke of on the revenue side, and then
Yes, you did.
tax rate increases are always an option as well, although that's usually a last resort for the council to try to decide on something like that. Okay, can we go to the
Thank you.
next slide? So this is I got a slide in here on our ARPA update. Remember that as this ARPA fund sits in our account, it earns interest, and we're required to use that for the purpose of the original ARPA. The current balance with interest is $6.6 million. Our planned use in 23, of course, is nothing. Go back, please. Somebody hit the button. Okay. And the general fund, we've got program 2.8 million for 24. And in 24, I think the way it's projecting, transportation may need to use some as well. That amount is based on my projections. However, that's assuming that transportation uses its own ARPA this year and depletes it. I don't know that I think that their projections are generous, and I don't know that they're going to deplete their ARPA this year. But so they may have some to put towards this, and we won't have to use the 3.1 next year, but this is what it's looking like at this point in time. And if you look at that and you project out what the balances will earn in interest over the course of the next year, so we'll have about 968,000 left to carry into 25. Next slide. Initiatives. So this is, you know, operational and capital stuff that we've put in the budget. This is put there primarily for the council presentation this afternoon. Some of the new initiatives, I won't call them new, well, continuing initiatives that we're putting into the budget. Money for Food Fridays, the intern program, which Mike spoke to earlier. We have a no harm program that's run out of the mayor's office. Just $10,000 for emergency temporary housing. Some additional winter relief monies for those very cold nights where we have to provide some emergency sheltering for individuals. We have some additional APD, the police department capital improvements for their building out there. They want to make some changes there. We're allocating some additional money to Rec and Parks for equipment, for training, and for additional programs. We've kind of left it in one piece in the administrative division so that our new director can decide how she wants to allocate those funds. We're making the fire quality assurance trainer a permanent position. Right now they're filling it with the funding from a vacant firefighter, and they want that firefighter position back to put them back into the scheduling rotation. So we're making that position permanent. We've added $15,000 to economic development funds so they can work with local businesses to try to do some economic development programs. We're making a contribution to Skipper's Lane, which is an extension of a road over near Forest Drive where development's going in, and it's going to help with traffic, but we're not running the project. So we're making it as a contribution to that out of the general fund for that project. Annapolis United was a program that was started in FY23, and we're allocating some funding to that next year. And there's a statue that we're providing a little funding for in the budget. Next slide. This, I won't go over this in detail. This is just a line, a grouping, a categorization of our revenues, actual projected for 23 and proposed for 24. I don't know if anybody has any particular questions. We've talked a lot about these in the previous slides. The intergovernmental line item there, when you see that jump in from 23 projected to 24 proposed, from 18 million to 22, that's the ARPA money that's plugged in there. The $2.8 million is a big chunk of that, but there is still an overall increase of about $2 million, no, not quite 2 million. I can't do that math in my head. $1.3 million. That's from increased revenue sources. Next slide. A peek at the parking and transportation revenues. The parking fund is not stable because of the changes that we're going through right now. 23 projection is a much higher. We're seeing all of the revenue coming from the downtown parking spaces are getting a lot of use this year because the garage is down, and our other garages are getting a lot of use because Hillman is down. So we're getting that revenue flow directly to us. But when the P3 takes effect, that revenue flow from the Hillman garage and from the downtown spaces goes into a trust, and we won't see that as quickly. It has to go through the trust to pay expenses before it comes to to the city. Transportation, our actual revenues from the prior year, 4.4 million. We're projecting 7.7 and proposing 7.9 for next year. One of the major impacts on the 22 was we did not make a transfer from the parking fund because they didn't need it from their expenses were down far enough. We didn't have to make the whole transfer. Next slide. So when looking at revenue assumptions for 24, we're in the third year of a 3-year assessment. We're adding about $1.7 million of revenue from that source into our budget. On the income tax side, we had only budgeted in the $9 million range. We ended up getting 11.3 million. We expect to see some growth there, but some of the $11.3 million was a one-time, was a catch-up payment from the state, which covered 3 different years. So I don't want to count on that coming every year. So I made a very conservative estimate with 11.6 million for next year. The tourism and group activities, those continue to give us a little bit extra. The harbor master continues to grow in revenues, our pool revenues and continue to increase. And our admissions taxes continue to climb. Liquor licenses, those are pretty flat. They've remained consistent from 22 to 23. I don't believe the liquor license charge has changed. I don't know how many years it's been since that's changed. And the overall revenue source there is down from the FY20 high. And I don't know if that's a symptom of the pandemic and the closure of businesses that had liquor licenses. And that's just continuing. On development permitting, it's strong. It was strong in 23, stronger than we anticipated. We've been conservative with our 24 estimate. We always are. Building permits go up and down. But according to my recent conversations with planning and zoning, there are some big developments in the works that could, if they start permitting in 24, we may see some generous numbers there as well. And then as I covered on the interest earnings, the interest rate hikes have helped us tremendously in our investment income, gotten us up to the $2 million level. And I'm expecting a little bit more in 24. Next slide. Here is the departmental breakdown of the general fund expenses. If you want to take a minute there, you can definitely see the jump in the 23 projected from the 22 actual on the police, in that we adjusted their pay scale substantially. But going into 24, all of our employees are going to get a 2.5% COLA. And some of them are getting the bonus again, but the bonus comes out of our one-time funds and is not now projected to reoccur for the next year unless we do something like that with our negotiation process again. And I don't know if anybody has any detailed questions there about the individual line items, but you can always take a look at this in the next few days and get back to us with questions. Next slide. Here we have just a pie chart with where the spending is occurring. Of course, the public safety departments add up to, with concluding Office of Emergency Management, just over half of our budget. The finance office, the majority of that pie slice there belongs to the non-allocated, which includes our debt service and all of our transfers to other funds, including our fleet transfers and our funding for retiree healthcare. Those types of things are in that budget. Next slide. Here we have the expenditures by category. And this is something that we've been talking about in the increases for the salary and benefits line. We generally are seeing increases on all categories. Salary and benefits is up as typically we see 67 to 74, that's 3, that's 7.5. And that on $100 million budget is about a 7.5% projection increase, includes steps and COLA. And remember, all of the one-time expenses are in these projections, so the bonuses are in there too. Where the $3,000 bonuses are in lieu of giving a high COLA to try to help people at least partially address high inflation. We're giving these bonuses, so that's in that 74.8 as well. Next slide. And here is that same grouping in a pie chart form. As you see, as we all know, salary and benefits is the major source of spending for a service related organization like the city. Next slide. When we look at 24 for general fund in the totals, we're projecting $104 million of revenue, and that includes the ARPA funding. And we have expenses of 109. The difference there's the $5 million. And that is as you see those two items you see there, us using our reserves for the purposes that they are reserved for. And the first one is the capital expenses. We're moving $2.6 million of that into the capital projects. And we're using 2.7 million of the one-time reserve in the FY24 budget. So there are 2.7 million of one-time items in our spending of 109 million. And when our FY23 audit is done, anything that we have to maintain 15% of the next year's budget in reserve. And it'll be split between the capital, any excess is split between capital reserve. We fill up the budget stabilization fund to its limit, and then the rest of it goes into the reserve for one time. Currently we're anticipating that we're going to add to those balances, and hopefully that's correct. But until the audit's done, we won't know for sure what the amount is. Excuse me. Next slide. This is just a table showing where we think fund balances and the reserves are going to be at the end of 23, projecting into 24, but that's just the assumption that we will spend every dollar that we budget in 24, and that our revenues will come in right on target. So there's a lot of variables there, but this shows you where we think we'll be in 23. As you can see, the 15% reserve will go up. 15% of the revenues from the general fund, the transportation fund, and the parking fund have to be in that 15% reserve. And the budget stabilization limit has increased because as that's dependent on the budget revenues as well. And so we are filling that up to its max, adding some to capital reserve, and then adding some to the one-time reserve issues. Keep in mind that between that 22 and the 23 projected column, we've allocated a lot of those reserves to purposes. So that's why the number goes down. Next slide. This is just a depiction of our fund balance policy. It shows you how we derive the fund balance 15% limit by adding together the revenues from 24 that are in the budget. We take 15% of that number, which is the 17.9% that 17.9 million that you see there. And right now we're projecting we'll have 23,676 in fund balance, which gives us an extra layer of $5.7 million that we'll be allocating to these three pots. Next slide, please. Pension costs, always something of interest. Police and fire, our study is done for the year. They're recommending that we move from a 34.1% of salaries to 34.25% of salaries. That's a small increase despite what's going on in the market in the last year. But those market changes, they smooth their effect in the actuarial study so that we don't see the impact of that in our contributions all right up front. This is a minimal cost increase for the city this year, and we estimate that at 38,900 for this change. And again, we're fully funding what the actuary is recommending, which we have for the last 5 years. On the state pension side, that's not as good. They've raised their contribution from 10.93% to 11.32%. Although the general fund, that's about 77,000 in the general fund and a total of 104,000 citywide for everyone that's in the state plan. Next slide. This is just some of the things that we're doing in the workforce that are in the budget. I don't know that the FAC will be interested in the details. I've told you we have a 2.5% COLA that's going to all, and we're extending that to contractual and temporary employees as well. We always adjust the minimum for those few that we have at the minimum wage level. We adjust the minimum wage when it takes effect. I don't know if there's any living wage legislation coming through the state. There may be. I know they were considering some that may impact our lower pay employees as well. So we might have to make some adjustments to that if that it takes effect during this fiscal year. We're planning the $3,000 bonuses for all exempt and civil service employees, except for the police union. They did not in their bargaining. They didn't with the big jump in their salary. They opted for that instead of taking the bonus. Merit steps are funded. Again, we've reserved, Mike spoke earlier about the study that we're doing. And in order to be able to affect some of those changes recommended by the study, we've set aside $250,000 for any potential upgrades or reclassifications that come about from that study. So we won't have to wait till the next budget cycle to put those into effect. That's a small amount. The impact of a reclass or an upgrade doesn't have that much of an annualized impact on one position, since it typically means another 5% increase or so to the salary of that person. We're converting 4 police positions that are currently under full-time contractuals to civil service. We have a policy that we've set with the state that anybody who's a full-time contractual person for 5 years has to be converted to civil service, with the assumption that if you're continuing them for that long, they're a permanent position and you need to convert them and enroll them in pension benefits. The harbor master has 1 conversion that we're doing to civil service, and the police are getting an upgrade for one of their PCOs. And transportation drivers. Transportation had a lot of vacancies this year as well. They're having a hard time attracting drivers for the buses because our pay rate, our beginning pay rate is nowhere near what other private bus transportation systems are paying. So they've asked us to increase that minimum pay. And Katie will have to help me. It might be $25 an hour. Katie, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And hopefully with them we'll be able to have more success in attracting bus drivers, because they've had quite a time, and their overtime is increasing to compensate for that. We have several new positions here. The city manager talked about the planning and zoning, MIT. That's one department where we need more resources in order to help us with upgrading our software and making things more efficient citywide. They're asking for more than this, but we've given them the analyst position this year. They've got several requests in for changes on personnel. Finance. Last year, I outlined a reorganization for finance with my perspective on what the department's missing, what we need to do, what we're being asked to do. One of those was a senior accountant for accounts receivable, and that's the person that I spoke of earlier. That that would be a point person for collecting on monies that we're not getting, and therefore increasing the amount of revenues coming in. But there's no, I'm not, as you know, I got a grant administrator position in my budget last year. We're not going to fill either that or this until we have office space. I'm out of office space. We have a couple of employees sharing desk space right now. And until we decide what we're doing on the office space front, I can't fill any positions. So this position is added to the budget, but I've taken a large turnover vacancy reserve against it. So my budget's not increasing for the additional position. We have a few contractual positions, one in the city manager's office, one, as we talked about, in planning and zoning. And the PIO is using some contractual assistance on a part-time basis. And we brought in an assistant ombudsman to help out this year. We're going to continue that contract. And transportation has a part-time transit supervisor. And the utility funds have asked to have some office help too. But that will be paid for by the enterprise funds. Next slide. Parking funds. We have the revenue in 23 is only 87,000 less than budgeted. That's pretty close. I'm surprised with the variables that we're working with there. I spoke earlier about the Hillman closure. It resulted in some substantial increases to revenue from downtown parking and other garages, which is showing in our revenue results. The FY23 expenditures are a little bit less than budget. We're holding back a little bit on the transfer to the transportation fund, both to maintain some balance in the parking fund, and the transportation fund has some ARPA funds that they need to utilize as well. So we're going to hold back until we know more about what the new P3 deal brings in as far as revenue flow from the trust accounts. In the FY24, Hillman, and I spoke of this earlier too, all the revenues from Hillman in the downtown parking district are going to go through the P3 trust first. They're going to pay for all of their operating expenses, pay for the debt service on the senior debt, and then the city will collect the waterfall payment that comes off the bottom. So we'll know more about what that's going to look like. And we only get that payment twice a year. So we may have to wait a few months into the year before we know how that's going to look. And there's an increase in that fund to debt service costs. That's because when we refunded the sub debt, we planned to pay off, we issued some of our own debt, and we plan to pay off that with the parking fund revenues that are coming through the waterfall. So those are the facts on the parking fund. I feel like this is the fund that I have the least amount of confidence in my estimates, because like I said, the situation changes when the garage opens, and we're hoping that we have at least the same amount of net revenue in the parking fund that we've had in the past, maybe more, because we're doing such a better job at enforcing the parking requirements in the neighborhoods and got all the parking apps out in the neighborhood spots. So we're being very diligent about enforcing parking requirements in the city. Next slide. Transportation fund, I've talked about them planning to use their remaining transportation ARPA funds this year. The parking fund is going to send about 1.4 million to them, which is less than what we had budgeted. We're holding back on that, as I mentioned. The city will, in 24, if my projections hold, we may have to use some of our own ARPA to help transportation. And parking will also be sending them $1.4 million. Next slide. This is a slide for enterprise fees. I don't know if the FAC is interested in these as well. they're increasing. All of them are increasing. Our sewer rates are going up by 3%. We've been able to have 0 increases in the past 2 or 3 years because the sewer fund projects weren't moving, capital projects weren't moving ahead quickly, but now they are. They're doing a lot of improvements. You may see some of the construction around town. And so we're increasing the rate by 3%. That helps cover any situations of increases for debt service or cash funding of their capital projects. On the water side, that's going up by 4.75%. Watershed restoration fee is going up by 7%. And we've got the rates there per quarter. And the solid waste collection is increasing by 10%. And that's going to be up to $356 for the year. Then we have a calculation in a table that we have in the budget book that shows for an estimated quarterly bill for a single family home that uses 10,000 gallons, your quarterly fee is increasing about 6.2%.
Hey, Jody, this is Bob. I have one question.
Mhm.
Looking at these fees, these projected increases, are they the result of the request for fee increases that will be included in this budget going before the city council? Or
Yeah.
are these the result of past fee increases?
So every year we have a consultant that analyzes the current financial situation of each utility fund, each of these enterprise funds, and projects out expenses and capital project funding, including debt service for the next several, maybe 20 years, and then projects where we think expenses are going and comes up with a rate model that has increases over time that will level out fee increases with the amount of minimum fund balance we want to retain in these funds. And right now, most of these funds, except for the watershed restoration, they had some excess fund balance that they've been lowering the fee increases in order to draw down that balance. And then in the out years, you see the model where the cash balance is presumed to be drawn down and the fees climb at a more steady rate. So these are fees that are not in the general fund. They're not related to what we were talking about earlier, but they do get updated every year with the rate studies.
Okay.
Next
Thank you.
slide. And so this is just a summary of the funding sources for the CIP. We don't have to spend a lot of time with this. We give this information to Davenport and they do their debt affordability analysis. And I'll tell you, it looks for the general fund, the debt affordability analysis looks very healthy. We shoot for 10%. We're just a little over 10% in a couple of the out years, but that always looks like that. And we always spend less on debt service than we project because the projection is very conservative. Next slide. These are just some takeaways. We kind of covered this in the past slides. We're financially stable. We have been for 5 years. There are financial policies that were established when the current administration came in, and our careful budgeting efforts have resulted in strong fund balance reserves. And we've maintained this even through some very difficult times. Our ARPA funding in 24 for recurring expenses will not be available beyond our FY25. So the city is going to have to, and I talked about this, review all fees, fines, and fortify your enforcement efforts, determine what the new property valuations for growth are going to be, and then evaluate, and we're evaluating alternative pension options, although you're not going to see any change in pension options have a major effect on your financial results immediately in the short term, that you're going to see that over the long term. And the results of these efforts will drive our talks for union negotiations, and then some of the things I talked about and considering what we need to do to balance our budget for the following year. Next slide. I think we're pretty much done. The last two slides address some of the questions that were talked about earlier on the budget timeline. And I will add to this May 8th date here that this is when the fact report is due as well. Next slide. And then these are the dates of the departmental budget reviews at this point. So for any fact members that want to tune in and watch any individual discussions, or they'll be broadcast and you'll be able to, I assume you'll be able to look at them later.
Jody, I just looked at the resolution and I don't see any date in the resolution by which the fact report to the city council is due.
I think that the fact deadline, if you look in the city code, the fact report due date is stipulated in a section of the code, and I don't have the code in front of me, Fred, so I'd have to look it up and find it. But it's my recollection that the fact report has to be there at the same time the finance committee report reaches the council, so that they can all start deliberating on any changes they want to make to the budget. And then within the next 2 weeks after that, they're figuring out what they want to do as far as amendments are concerned. So, Ellie, I don't know if you know where that
I
fact.
think the confusion is that we just revised that in the code with that ordinance that just passed. And we probably should add that to this timeline, that the fact report is due concurrently with the finance department report on May 8th.
And that's specified in that just passed resolution, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Ordinance. It was the ordinance.
The ordinance, I'm sorry.
that passed.
Okay, thank you.
I assume we'll get a copy of this
Yeah.
PowerPoint
I was
presentation.
waiting to widely distribute this until I finish with the council presentation this afternoon, and by the end of today, we'll send it out to everybody.
Yeah, maybe we can tweak this calendar.
Yeah, no, I can change the slide to put the fact date on there too. The original intention was, this was my council presentation, but decided to present it this morning and didn't have time to completely edit everything.
Okay. Doesn't give a lot of time. Jody, thank you very, very, very much.
No, I agree. For your purposes, with being an outside commission, it's not a lot of time to find time to meet and scrutinize and ask questions. It's just the nature of the budget beast, I think.
All right, let's talk about another, well, first, anybody, commission members have any questions or comments for Jody on her PowerPoint report? If not, let's talk about, meetings. I looked at my calendar. And let me just throw out the dates that I am available between now and have to allow sufficient time to get information and prepare a report, have it reviewed by the commission and finalized, et cetera, et cetera. I'm available the 17th, which is, I think, Monday, next Monday, the 20th, 24th, 25th, 27th, May 1st, and May 2nd. So I think that our initial next meeting needs to be the earlier to mid-range rather than later. It may very well be that we'll need a meeting on May 1st or 2nd to finalize and approve the report. But how, let me ask this question. Jody, you said that there's a joint, quote, joint, close quote, meeting with the finance committee and financial advisory commission on the 27th at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, so I should probably add that the finance committee meetings are happening Monday through Thursday for the next 2 weeks. And Friday is open. Finance Committee is not available to meet on Fridays. And so every morning from 9:30 to 1:30, there's a Finance Committee meeting where their departments are doing their presentations. Just so that's a backdrop. If you want staff to be at your meetings, I don't know at which meetings you'll want us there, but the mornings for the next 2 weeks, Monday through Thursday, are not available. Then the question is the afternoons. There are some fairly open for me, but on Thursdays from 3 to 5, we typically have a work session with the council. And the one that you were referring to, getting to your question, is that second week on a Thursday in the afternoon, 3 to 5. So that's Thursday, the 20th. No, I'm sorry, nope, I'm on the wrong week again. 27th. That is the work session where we're going to be covering debt affordability. But for the most part, Monday through Thursday afternoons, for the most part, there's a couple of exceptions, are open these next 2 weeks for me. My Fridays are open. Then you probably want to save that first week in May to be working on your report. So we're kind of talking about the next 2 weeks for any special meetings you have.
Let's talk about Davenport. Well, first, what you're saying is we cannot have any meetings in the morning for the next few weeks?
You can have them. I can't be there. And the city manager may not be able to be there. Katie will not be able to be there. So if you need our assistance to answer questions, which you typically do during your early deliberations, you're going to want us there. That's what I was saying. I can't be there. You can hold the meetings if it's just the commission.
When can you be there?
Fred, I think what Jody's advocating is that if we're going to meet, and we definitely would like to have Jody available, we're looking at afternoon meetings after 3 o'clock. Is that correct, Jody?
Afternoon meetings, generally 3 o'clock or after. Monday through Wednesday is better.
Okay, so we as a fact would be looking at afternoon meetings to be able to prepare for our recommendation to the city council on May 8th.
And as far as I'm concerned, if you did an evening, I could do an evening too. I don't know if that works better with your schedules, but I don't know how the other staff are available in the evenings.
Okay. I have a lot of afternoon and evening meetings, couple weeks.
Do you want Kim to work with your members and try to find some times that are available on everybody's schedules? And who do you want here from the staff?
Yeah, we'll talk about Davenport for a second. Are they appearing live to the council, or are they going to be remote?
They're, I believe, appearing live. Unless I get a word otherwise. The meetings are in person. If they do remotely, we'd have to get them in on Skype or some kind of connection in the council chambers. It's been done before, but it's not something we're doing on a regular basis. I have Davenport's report. And like I said, they'll be delivering it on the 27th in the afternoon. Do you want them to make a time to come talk to you individually? They could do a virtual meeting with you.
Yeah, that's fine, but my concern is when. How about we just try and schedule the first meeting, special meeting, and then we can, at that point, take it from there. I am available the afternoon of or the week of the 17th. The only afternoon I'm available is 20th.
Okay,
Sorry, what date did you say, Fred?
20th, next Thursday.
Okay. Now, when you say afternoon, what time frame are you looking at, Fred?
I am looking at whatever time frame the earliest I can work for staff, because I think it's important that Jody be there.
Yes, I agree.
So it's virtual, so let me see. 12:30, 1:30. I could probably be here as quickly as 2:30. I have physical therapy and it ends at 1:30, and I can be here with this, since it's virtual, it's quicker for me to come home than to go back to the office, so I can do that.
Okay,
There is a work session that day, but however, I don't have to be at that work session. It's not a budget related work session.
all right. How about the 20th at 3 o'clock? Will that work? And if we have Davenport there too?
Okay, I'll check with them. Make sure they can do it. Occasionally, they have more than one person that can help us and do the presentation, but sometimes they're both on another project or something that they have limits, so
Yeah.
I'll have to check with them.
Okay, appreciate that. So the 20th at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
How does that work for everybody else on the fact?
I have a meeting that day starting at 4, so I can be there at 3, but I need to leave by 4.
Well, tell you what, let's make it 2:30 then. So
And-
we've had Frank for as long as we have him. Ed, you got a problem with that?
Sorry. On the afternoon of the 20th, I'm supposed to be in court. And I don't know how long that'll last, but it'll probably last a good part of the afternoon. I don't want to be the sticking point, so I mean, if that works for other people, go ahead and I'll catch up.
Yeah, I know it worked for, I'm pretty sure it worked for Jim Cardillo. Let's just do it there, because my guess is that we're gonna have an issue any day. Joey, just so happens I have physical therapy at the same time you do. And I'm having some surgery the day before.
Wow.
So, but we gotta get these things done, and we'll get them done. So let's set, and Kim, if you can send out a notice to fact members, special meeting, 2:30. Yeah, that'll work. 2:30 on the 20th. Take it from there.
Fred, I have a question. Are you
Bob.
proposing that Davenport be at the meeting of the 20th to give us the report that they're also going to provide to the Finance Committee on the 27th?
Yes, and the reason is because I don't know how many fact members will be able to attend the joint meeting on the 27th. And also, I'm a little bit concerned about timing. And timing for us to be able to assimilate our thoughts and begin to put them in writing. So yes, that was my thought, Bob. If you and others think differently, we can just leave it for the 27th. I have something else on the 27th, so it's unlikely I will be able to attend that work session.
Well, the only concern I had was in deference to the Finance Committee of the City Council. I mean, I don't know how Ellie would feel about that. It's just, we've had joint meetings in the past where we both received the report at the same time. That's the only reason I raised the question.
It's a good point, Bob.
I guess it's just a matter of protocol and appropriateness, that's all.
Well, I like the plan for the simple fact that if we can't meet until the 27th, and the same as Fred, I wouldn't be able to be there. Only it gives us 10 days to respond. We'd have to have another meeting in between there.
Ellie, Jody, buddy, thoughts?
Well, I think the 27th, or the objective of the joint meeting was, we're both on the same path to review the budget, and I think that collaboration, in that session would be very beneficial. And that's pretty much the objective, that we're receiving the same information at the same time.
All right, well, let's just leave Davenport the 27th, and we can, fact members, we can all do the best we can to try and get there, at least virtually, if not in person.
It should be broadcast as well, so it's a work, am I correct, Ellie? The work session, that's handled a little bit differently than the finance committee meeting, but
Wait a minute, I'm talking about the finance committee meeting on the,
so I thought, hold on a second. On the 27th, so it's on the finance committee meeting?
yes.
Hold
We're
on.
keeping those dates, those times consistent in the morning, starting at 9:30 with a hard stop at 1:15.
Okay, so it's not, the city council work session that day is not the Davenport report, it's the CIP? What?
We'll talk offline.
Okay,
Yeah,
all
they're
right,
just,
so if it's the finance committee meeting that day, it's in the morning, Fred. I'm sorry if I was wrong on the Davenport thing. I thought I told him the afternoon, so I'm gonna have to check and see what I told him.
sorry, yeah, we were trying to be consistent and have all those meetings in the morning, the finance department review. But if maybe this is something that Mike can help us with. I didn't plan Thursday as a work session.
There
Are you
is a
referring-
work- there is a work session that day, so I don't know what it addresses then. It's not that. I'm gonna have to check and see what the,
Yeah, check with Gina on that, because I think, I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but I think it was something that one of the members of council wanted to discuss, nothing of, general.
Okay, so that's
So we may
separate.
be able to move it off. And Jody, and Joe did reach out to me about getting together after. their
Oh, that's nice.
presentation. So you may want to, make sure we reserve that.
okay. I'm gonna have to see what I told them then on the presentation.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah, and Regina would, and I could try to scroll down in this meeting, but it may be better just to check with Regina.
So Fred, if that Davenport that presentation is in the morning on the 27th, does that make it easier?
No.
No, okay. All right.
Will we receive pre-reads prior to that meeting?
Pardon?
Will we receive pre-reads prior to the Davenport meeting on the 27th, or?
So I have the report. They just sent it to me yesterday, I think. So I like to check the numbers and make sure they tie down to our numbers, and then I can distribute that as well.
Mhm.
But they'll be there to answer questions and
Okay, so right now for the 27th, the meeting time with Davenport is yet to be determined then. Is that what I understand?
yeah, I think we're not sure when it's time for, and if I've told them the wrong time or not. Let me make sure. I don't want to screw everybody up, including Davenport, and have them all coming at the wrong time.
That would be a problem.
So did we agree at least to have a meeting on the 20th at 2:30?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
And did we further agree that that meeting will not include Davenport? And Davenport will, we will receive the Davenport information at the same time as whoever else is receiving it.
So I will send them an email. I sent them an email asking them about that day. If it turns out that nobody can make the 27th, I can ask them to come and do another presentation, but it's good to do it together. So,
Fred, and Ellie, I did get the work session for the 20th up. And the 3 items on there, I think in the context of the budget can be moved, but,
so it's, we're looking at the 27th, Mike, right? I think,
oh, I thought you were talking about the 20th.
The 20th for a special fact meeting,
fact meeting, and I'm gonna go to that because I don't have to go to.
What
the
time is it?
2:30.
Yeah, well, it'll overlap for Ellie's sake and if Ross goes with the work session is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
And they're not, I mean, it's the Annapolis Charter School Workforce Development and the Assistant Ombudsman that you mentioned. The 27th is, as you mentioned, it's just the CIP discussion and debt affordability.
And what time do you have that? Do you have that set?
Yeah, it's scheduled for 3.
Okay,
So I think Ellie and I have to go back and look at the morning meeting and seeing what's on for the morning meeting, because now we have some confusion on what's going on that day. So.
Right, and that's the day that Joe, that, about us getting together, but yeah, that's for the 27th.
okay,
And so that, then we have one in later in the next month on the 25th of May, and it's just budget amendments and so on. So
okay.
that's the schedule.
So, we have the 20th at 2:30. We have the 27th at 3 o'clock. That is an in-person joint meeting with the city council, or somebody can't appear in person. It will be broadcast live on City of Annapolis TV. Is that right? And who has access to that? Just city residents or people with a city?
No,
I think it's online, Fred, so
yeah, you
anyone,
can just go on the internet site to the
Yeah.
city. And
so anyone could, you could be, I don't know, on vacation in Palm Beach and watch it if so inclined.
Okay. All right, so let's leave it for those two. At the 20th, let's see how far we get at the 20th. And then we can decide whether we need another meeting between the 20th and 27th, or whether it's just going to be May 1st or May 2nd to talk about the report.
okay, and then right now for the 27th, it's presently scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon unless we hear otherwise. Is that correct?
That is, as far as I know, I think that's correct.
Okay.
Correct, Jody?
Yeah, well, it's just a matter of shifting it to 3 o'clock. It is a published, work session. So we'll shift it to 3, Jody, and take the morning off. You know what I mean? Just shift it to 3.
you may have other departments that you haven't heard or something that day. So we may,
That's true.
taking the morning off, we may have some more overflow
Right, we
time.
could allocate that as a carryover morning or something, but
Mhm.
let's just keep the 3 o'clock work session intact with the objective of fact being there.
Mhm.
Okay, and it may be that one or more fact members will be there remotely or just watching as opposed to in person in the council chamber. So I see on my calendar, I have something at 5 or 5:30 that afternoon. So I'm not sure whether I can be in person or whether I'll have to be there some other way. So, okay,
Fred,
yes, Bob.
Fred, I'll try to be there in person at 3 o'clock.
That's
On the
great.
20 On the 27th, I will put that on my schedule and I'll try to be there in person.
Great. Thank you very much. And if there's any way I can, I will. I may be able to come for most of it. I leave early so I can make my 5:30 commitment. We'll play it by ear. We'll get it done as we always do. Anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah, Fred, I just have one question, if I may.
Sure, Bob.
Now, we had sent a letter to the city council administration, regarding the collective bargaining agreement and budget timelines and so forth. I was wondering if that was received and if there was any response to that letter.
I see Councilwoman Tierney is shaking her head yes. So I take that to
Right,
mean
I mean,
pleasant.
out of courtesy, I should, yes, we did receive that, and I did forward it to the law office requesting a response from them because of the, their opinion. And I didn't, they didn't, was anyone from the law office here? I don't want to speak for them, but yeah, I acknowledge we both received it, and I don't think I got a response from the law office that they would respond formally.
But the ordinance itself was adopted, as I understand.
It was, yeah. I mean, I got your comments, and that the way that should work is if we were all in agreement, then that would become an amendment, but that didn't happen.
Okay, so the ordinance was adopted prior to getting a response from the Office of Law referencing our concerns that we expressed. Is that
right?
correct?
A formal response, yeah. But it was read by everyone, your opinion, but that didn't result in any sort of amendment to the legislation that was passed. So I think that the discussion has to be made directly with the law office on your position.
Well, that boat has already left the dock.
Well, yeah, I don't know if that is, I don't know if that in that level of detail would have been language in the code anyways.
Well, then why did we go through the effort that we went through to get the letter to you in a timely manner, only for it to be, in essence, read and ignored, and you pass the ordinance anyhow?
Right. No, I wouldn't say it was ignored.
Well, obviously, we didn't get a response back. It was forwarded to the Office of Law for a formal response, but yet the city council went ahead and adopted the ordinance anyhow prior to a formal response. I just don't quite understand, what role we had then. I mean, we made a special effort to draft a letter and get it to the city council for consideration. I would assume that the letter was received and thought well enough that you should counsel with the Office of Law, but nonetheless, the city went ahead and adopted the ordinance prior to a formal report from the City of Law, as I understand your comments this morning. I just have to say it's very disappointing because there's a lot of work that went into that letter, and recognizing that we were pressed for time, and in essence,
I'm not representing office sufficiently. The law office did receive that. I asked them for a formal response. I did not get a formal response. I think that there's more dialogue to be had, and I don't think that will result or would have resulted in any sort of code revision. This is a policy issue that should be discussed directly with the law office. I can't speak for them.
Well, I beg to differ because the ordinance was amended to remove the appropriate, or what we thought were the appropriate deadlines for negotiations to conclude. And we provided a solution that if they didn't conclude, what could flow from there. So it was ordinance related. It was not policy related, in our opinion. And that's the reason why we expedited our effort to get a letter to the city council, because it was ordinance related. It related directly to the language of the ordinance. I just have to say I'm very disappointed in the way this was handled. And I don't think the onus can be put on the office of law. The onus is on the city council. You set your agenda, you set your schedules, you set when you choose to do your first, second, and third readers on these ordinances. And with the effort that the FAC put into it, I don't see any reason why the city council could not have waited, for the appropriate responses and, before they went forward. So really, it's not on the Office of Law's shoulders that this ordinance was passed at the timeline that it was. That has to deal with the way you scheduled it and the way that the ordinance was voted on. And, we have a role. The point is, Ellie, we have a role as a FAC to provide advisory opinions. And we do everything in our ability to be timely in our efforts to do it. Okay. And this is an example where we exercised our responsibility, but, I just don't think we received the courtesy of the city council after we put in the time to give what we thought was a very valid advisory recommendation. So let's just leave it at that.
Bob, I do want to mention that part of the discussion, I'm going to say two things. And one, advisory is a word that is just what it is. But two, there's a bigger picture issue with your letter that we've all been discussing around, which is how deeply the FAC can get involved in the labor negotiations. And that is something that isn't just set to that legislation. So I wouldn't dismiss that this isn't still relevant and still something that we need to hear from the Office of Law on. That's really the critical issue that I think from the administration standpoint that we were looking for information on. So I'll follow it up, and nothing is set in stone in this process, and don't think it was ignored. Much of what you say and ask for, we're doing, and we were talking about the defined contribution plans today, and putting a severe investment into the time and effort to follow through. So don't just say we swept it under the rug or the council has. It really isn't the case.
Well, there were several components to that letter, Mike. Okay. Certainly one of them, we did address the participation of the FAC when it, in the union negotiations. Obviously, that's not ordinance related, that's policy related, and we knew that. Okay, but the other component, had to deal with the ordinance prior to amendment, stipulated a specific timeline when collective bargaining agreements needed to conclude in order for a budget to, be able to be struck that had the relevant, agreements in place, what the terms of the agreements were. And we advised, I thought very strongly that those timelines be kept. And if the timelines could not be met, there were solutions to address that. And that's the part of the letter that concerns me, that we were told that in order to get our advisory opinion in, that we had a specific timeline that we had to get that letter to you on. And my understanding from the comments that came from Ellie is that our concern on those timelines were such that they did approach the Office of Law to address it. but there was not a formal response that came back from the Office of Law. But the city council went ahead and approved the ordinance anyhow, removing the deadlines. So that is that's the concern I'm expressing. You know, the other component I understand is policy related, and that's fine. I know there's still work and discussion to occur on that. And I appreciate, Mike, any considerations, you know, that can be given to that concern. But the other issue in that letter was ordinance related, and I am just extremely disappointed at the way that that was handled. And there's not much else I can say about that. And I'm speaking on my behalf. I don't know what the other FAC members think, but, you know, nonetheless, and I understand we're an advisory body, but it's just kind of nice to know that when you give advice, that, you know, first of all, that we're being heard. Second of all, we're being considered. And third of all, there's a response that's gotten back to us. Okay. And quite frankly, I think that there was just, you know, failure on all three of those components, you know. So that's all I have to say on that matter.
Bob, thanks for your comment. Mike, thanks for the follow-up. And anybody else have anything for the good of the order? Yes, Jody.
So while you were discussing that topic, I went and opened up last year's presentation to see what Bob was talking about earlier, and he is right. The original 23 proposed budget totaled 100,434,000. The confusion was that after that point, we had several amendments to that 23 budget, including our own amendment to add to the union reserve. If you remember, we had an amendment for that, which was substantial, and the council added several amendments. So the fact that my actual expenditures, 100 million, came in close to that number is simply coincidental. That was the original number. Several things were added, and it ended up at 104 million at the end. And so the 100 million of spending is actually $4 million under the final passed budget. But this is the proposed number, and that's what it started at. So that was the confusion. I just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you, Jody.
Bob was right. Bob,
Thank you.
I just couldn't imagine what he was looking at, but would tie to my number. But that is correct. That's what we originally proposed, but that's just a coincidence. I'm not that good.
And let me just share this email. You know, emails are public. So I think where it was dropped, this is to Bob's concern as far as dropping the ball. You know, your letter was referred by me to the law office. I did get an internal response from Miss Carrie Berger, and she specifically said that she would defer to Mr. Lyles on whether there's a need for a response from their office. But I will point out that some of their recommendations are legally problematic, especially the recommendation that the old terms carry over into the next fiscal year if ACBA isn't reached by the deadline, as that needs to be negotiated with the unions prior to codification. I didn't think it was my place to cut and paste that as a response from the council until I heard from Michael Lyles. So I apologize for dropping the ball there. But that was the response to the part that could have been amended.
Okay.
Thank you, Ellen.
All right, now, one more time. Anything else for the good of the order? If not,
I have to run. Thank
yeah,
you.
If not, the 20th at 3:30 at 2:30. I'll see you all then.
Thank you.
We'll talk later. Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye now.
Thank you, Bob and Fred. Good discussion.